The Jedi High Council, or simply the Jedi Council, is one of the most pivotal elements of world building introduced in the Star Wars prequel trilogy, symbolizing the Order at its best and, at times, its worst. Comprised of 12 of the wisest and strongest Jedi Masters, this august body of super space wizards has played pivotal roles in the Star Wars narrative since their introduction in 1999. With their in-universe deeds spanning over 25,000 years of galactic history. While Luke Skywalker initially refrained from re-establishing a formal High Council in the early years of his new Jedi Order due to the corruption that had plagued the group during the Old Republic, internal strife caused by the Yuuzhan Vong and Swarm Wars eventually forced the Grand Master to take complete control of the fledgling group, and a new Jedi Council was finally established. In today's video, we will be ranking the members of the new Jedi Order era Jedi High Council from weakest to strongest in order to determine which masters reign supreme. However, before we go over the list, I need to establish disclaimers, as there are many. Firstly, as I said a second ago, this video will be based exclusively on the known members of the new Jedi Order's variation of the Jedi Council, which is a separate organization from the ones seen in the prequel trilogy and other works. However, unlike my past ranking videos, I am going to be covering every character that has ever served on the NJO Council, meaning that the masters featured will be taken between the years 35 ABY to 138 ABY. My reasoning behind these cutoff dates stem mainly from the fact that we know almost nothing about the 85-year gap between Crucible and Legacy, with the comics only introducing 4 new council members with pretty clear-cut scaling in relation to each other, which would make a video dedicated solely to them kinda redundant. Secondly, while characters such as Kyle Katarn can be power-scaled a few different ways due to being featured in games with multiple campaign outcomes determined by player choice, I will be deferring to their light side storylines for this video, as they are the canon depictions of the characters featured, and the ones supported by the vast majority of supplemental materials. The only exceptions I will make with this rule are with any pieces of dark side campaign lore that are consistent across both versions, directly canonized by creators, or referenced by canonized supporting sources. General statements made by creators will also be considered if they are reputable and do not drastically contradict the narratives presented in their stories. Lastly, while some of these Jedi Masters can be said to have not reached the peaks of their potential when the EU was axed, or never did so period, I will be examining them based on how strong they were during the NJO timeframe, rather than what they could have been. However, I will reference where their peaks could rank when and where I deem appropriate. With all that out of the way, let's get started. Starting in G tier, we have the Jedi Masters Tilly Quay and Barratk'l. These two are the most bare-bones members of the NJO Council. Tilly has never been portrayed in a combative scenario, nor is she attributed with anything notable in any supplementary sources. Barratk'l is similar in that she has also never been shown in a fight. However, she is stated to possess great strength and endurance, and was noted to have contributed to the liberation of Coruscant from the lost tribe of the Sith. These accolades alone warrant placing Barratk'l at the top of G tier, since they at least confirm that she can fight, which is more than you can say for Tilly. Next in F tier, we have the Jedi Masters Tion Solusar and Octa Ramus. Despite possessing significant differences in their skill sets, Tion and Octa share many equivalencies in combative portrayal, and tend to serve in more of a support role than the other Masters, which is why I place them on the same overall tier. Tion Solusar was the chief lore keeper of the new Jedi Order and co-leader of the Yavin and Ossus Jedi Academies. While her fact file does state that she was not as strong in the Force as her classmates at the time of her enrollment, which includes a sizable portion of this list, it also confirms that she made up for it with enthusiasm and devotion to her studies. As lorekeeper, Tion's academic intelligence was arguably second only to Luke Skywalker himself, with the Grand Master being the one who first recognized her natural talent for teaching, hence her elevation to Academy leader. Force-wise, although Tion did lack power, at least by NJO standards, which is canonically higher than prequel-era standards, she did not fall short in versatility. A great example being when she and her husband Cam used a Fallenasi illusion technique to mask the entire Yavin Academy from prying eyes during the early Vong War. A feat worth taking into account for its scale, if nothing else. That said, I won't shy away from the fact that combat was not Tion Solusar's specialty, as she did kinda get her hand and foot shot off by a GAG major during the Second Galactic Civil War. Granted, she was unarmed at the time, but it's still a pretty bad look for Tion given that the book expressly states that she had seen the attack coming and tried to defend herself, but was too slow. And I simply don't see that situation playing out with any of the other counselors ranked above her on this list. Octa Ramus was the former apprentice of Tion Solusar, though where her master excelled in teaching, she excelled as a pilot. In fact, Octa is stated to be one of the greatest Jedi aces of her day, with the extensive time she spent on high-gravity planets enabling her to build up high levels of raw physical strength, which was enhanced further by her use of the Force. The Jedi Master's instincts for aerial combat were best expressed by her mastery of Force melds, which allowed her to synchronize her mind with her allies to improve tactical coordination. While we're on the subject of ethereal specialties, both Ramus and her Padawan Saha Dorvald have been praised for their talents with telekinesis, with the Jedi Master using the power to hurl waves of stones at her fellow council members during an intense sparring session on the fourth moon of Endor. This segues nicely into Octa Ramus's most notable feat, where she used telekinesis to kill the Sith Saber Ka'ela Fey by manipulating an electrified cable during the liberation of Coruscant. This display solidifies Ramus as worthy of Council status, since Sith Sabers were the Lost Tribes equivalent of NJO Jedi Knights, who, as mentioned, are confirmed to be stronger than the Jedi Knights of the prequel era. In E tier, we have the Jedi Masters Trassa, Kukruk, and Silgal. Before we go any further, I want to stress that Trassa and Kukruk's scaling is mainly centered on their feats during the Clone Wars, as neither of them do much of anything combatively during Legacy. The most we get is Trassa deflecting a few blaster bolts with Tutaminis, along with Kukruk one-shotting 2 rank-and-file 1 Sith. Not unimpressive, but also not very substantial. There is no question that the two got substantially stronger in the 157-year gap between series. We just have no way of measuring their upper limits, which is why they aren't ranked any higher. That said, I will go over where I personally think it would make sense to rank them later on. Trassa was the former Jedi Watchman of the Kifu sector who served the old Jedi Order for centuries before its fall. As with all Neti, Saw possessed an innate connection to the Force since birth, even being referred to as a famous Neti Jedi in the same vein as Ood Binar, Garnu, and Uru Ku. Fame can be attained for more than just strength, however, the comparison does still imply that Saw was special even by the standards of her people. Noteworthy praise given their natural sensitivity. Regarding feats, Trassa helped to fend off an ambush from the Crimson Nova Bounty Hunters Guild during the Clone Wars, outperforming Barris Offee in both mental acuity and force capability when she casually moved large trees to protect her allies from a raging fire. Jumping to Legacy, Trassa doesn't have any direct showings aside from deflecting blaster bolts with her Tutaminis ability. That said, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge her masterful use of battle meditation during the Battle of the Hidden Temple. One of the most well-known EU force powers, battle meditation was a pinnacle telepathic technique that enabled practitioners to enhance the morale, stamina, and overall combat prowess of allies while simultaneously reducing the combat effectiveness of enemies by eroding their will to fight. Trassa used this power to amp her Jedi comrades in order for them to fight off Darth Krayt's newly invigorated Sith Order, eventually consolidating her and Nat Skywalker's life force into a massive wave of light side energy that split the heavens and swept aside the Imperial fleet, a beacon of hope in a universe sundered by darkness. K'Kruk was another member of the old Jedi Order who became a council master of the NJO, who, while less experienced than Trassa, completely outstrips her in terms of lore and combative portrayal. K'Kruk has various statements of being a fierce warrior, with his telekinetic power being sufficient to pull down an ore hauler shortly after Order 66. K'Kruk, and by extension Trassa, would later be subject to the Dark Times and Vong War training accolades I've covered in past videos, with Cade Skywalker even referring to his former teacher as being the NJO's equivalent of a War Master and High Priest. Pretty significant praise given how monstrously powerful the Yuuzhan Vong are. His most famous attribute was his sheer endurance. General Grievous has referred to K'Kruk as interminable, and it's not hard to see why. He has been shot, thrown off multi-story heights, buried under mountains of rubble, and even cleaved through the belly by lightsabers, and lived to tell about it. Either repairing the damage over time through his mastery of hibernation trances, or just tanking it outright. He's not invincible, but the Force has clearly been looking after him. In terms of accomplishments, K'Kruk would battle Asajj Ventress, General Grievous, and post-Dooku training Quinlan Vos at various points in the Clone Wars. And while he did not win any of these battles, he was able to hold his ground in each of them. I would even argue he was low-key winning against Vos for a bit there, with his defeat owing mainly to a combination of Quinlan's raw force power and the environment in which they fought. These displays become all the more impressive when we consider the fact that both Asajj and Grievous were strong enough to fight prequel-era council members on the regular, with that version of K'Kruk being much weaker than his NJO self, even if we don't know precisely by how much. This segues nicely into the Legacy era itself, where the most K'Kruk does is one-shot two nondescript members of the One Sith. Again, not unimpressive, but still not enough to bump him up any higher. Silgal is at the top of this tier due to possessing greater wisdom and far more impressive force abilities than Dark Times K'Kruk. I would still give K'Kruk an edge in melee combat, but the gap between them is not enough to alter their positions on this list. Silgal has a lot of impressive hype surrounding her capabilities, even being referred to as a powerful and skilled Jedi Master despite her stated aversion to physical combat and inferiority to Kyle Katarn or Kip Duron. Moving into her actual capabilities, Silgal's vast knowledge of Jedi lore and science granted her an extremely robust skill set, being credited with numerous advanced force powers such as Force Stun, the Art of Small, Battle Meditation, and even the extremely potent Sever Force. Her specialty, however, lay in the Art of Healing. Not only is Silgal confirmed to be the most skilled healer of the NJO Council, she is confirmed to be one of the greatest Jedi healers, period, with her character sheet stating that there were few injuries and ailments she could not cure. Considering that Force healing is a branch of power noted for its high complexity, Silgal being a supreme grade practitioner is not something to overlook. As I've said in the past, despite what some video games would have you believe, your average Jedi cannot just auto-self-heal in the middle of a battle with no negative repercussions. Mending through the Force requires skill and spirit that relatively few possess, which adds credit to statements about Silgal's power. Regarding combative showings, although Silgal is stated to be less martially focused than many of her peers, that didn't mean she had nothing going for her. During the aforementioned council sparring session on Endor, which is stated to have been extremely dangerous to anyone who wasn't a council master, Silgal fought Luke Skywalker alongside Kip Duron. While the Moncall could pace the Grand Master briefly, she was only doing as well as she did thanks to Master Duron's assistance. This is made abundantly clear when Silgal duels Luke one-on-one and is almost instantly disarmed, with her conceding and opting to go spar Corran Horn instead. A loss to be sure, but considering Luke's scaling, which we'll get to later, I'd hardly call it an anti-feat. Jumping to the Fate of the Jedi arc, Silgal would be confronted by the Jedi Knight Sothea Sar while he was infected by Abeloth's Force Psychosis. The two fought, though fought is a charitable way of describing this encounter since Silgal stomped Sar while deliberately holding back, anticipating his attacks in a manner worthy of a Jedi Master before KOing him with a Force Blast he could not alleviate. Natasi Dalla would go on to describe the bout as though Silgal had flattened Sotheus like a bug. So, yeah, healing may be her preferred thing, but you'll be underestimating her at your own risk. Next in D tier, we have the Jedi Masters Tresina Lobi and Cam Solasar. The first member of the Chev species to manifest Force sensitivity, Tresina is sparse in combative portrayal, but what she lacked in quantity, she more than made up for in quality. The primary substantiations for Lobi's ranking are her fights with the Dark Jedi Alima Rar and the Sith Lord Lumaya in Legacy of the Force Tempest. While Alima initially viewed the Jedi Master as an easy kill, she was quickly proven wrong, stating that while Lobi had never been a flashy fighter, she was still powerful, effective, and clearly deserving of her spot on the council. A battle ensues where Tresina bullies Alima at every turn, almost literally kicking her to the curb at one point. Realizing she couldn't win by herself, Alima called for help, which Lumaya obliged. Master Lobi briefly held out against the two Darksiders, even cutting off Lumaya's robotic arm, but was ultimately overwhelmed by the team-up, losing her life. For reference, Alima Rar is consistently portrayed as a rival to Leia Solo, whereas Lumaya's strength put her in contention with Luke Skywalker. Fighting such foes 2-on-1 and not getting instantly obliterated is a pretty monstrous feat. However, the book makes it clear that the only reason Tresina did as well as she did was due to leveraging both the environment and her Chev agility to keep the two Darksiders tripping and stumbling and getting in each other's way. Once Alima and Lumaya disentangled themselves and got serious, the fight was over pretty quickly, which makes sense considering Lumaya alone scales to much stronger Jedi. Still though, Tresina Lobi's performance in the 2v1 speaks very well of her ability to manipulate battlefields to her advantage, and I won't deny the fact that she outclassed Alima, someone who rivaled Leia, who herself has better feats than any of the Council Masters featured in the previous tiers. Cam Solasar was a member of Darth Sidious's Darkside Elite before being brought back to the light by Luke Skywalker, eventually becoming the first battle master of the new Jedi Order before being supplanted by Kyle Katarn. Battle Masters were the head lightsaber instructors of the Jedi, with Cam being cited as one of the more well-known individuals to have held the title throughout all of galactic history. As one might expect, Solasar has various statements of being a powerful warrior, particularly in lightsaber combat. He is one of the few council members on this list confirmed to have mastered all 7 forms of classical Jedi fighting, with Skywalker directly comparing his talents as a duelist to those of Corran Horn, which falls in line with his feats, which we'll get to shortly. In regards to Force combat, Cam's moveset was fairly standard for an NJO Council Master, however, his power level was most assuredly not. He was stated to be tremendously powerful back when he was a Darkside Adept, which was by far his weakest incarnation. Not only could he craft illusions large enough to mask the entire Jedi Academy, but his TK could shred entire speeders like they were paper. During the time gap between Dark Empire 1 and 2, Cam Solusar would clash with Luke Skywalker on Nespis 8, with the Jedi Master successfully bringing him back to the light side. While the comic book adaptation skips this confrontation entirely, we do see it play out in the Dark Empire 2 audio drama. In it, Cam and Luke are depicted clashing back and forth, though the new Essential Guide to Characters does state that Luke wanted to redeem Cam from the get-go and still managed to beat him. Regardless of the self-imposed nerf, Cam's ability to clash with Luke in any capacity is still very impressive given that Luke had defeated the most powerful incarnation of Darth Sidious just 6 months prior. Jumping ahead to his Jedi career, Cam Solusar would battle his future council peer Corran Horn in a high-intensity sparring match 6 years before the Yuuzhan Vong War. The two were virtually even the entire time, though Cam ultimately came out victorious when he opted to trip Corran up with telekinesis. Despite the victory, I actually see this feat as reflecting better on Corran than it does on Cam, due to both Corran's special weakness against TK, and the fact that Cam was the only one shown taking a direct physical strike during the match. That said, Cam and Corran are frequently cited as equals in terms of lightsaber skill, a dynamic I believe does hold true for the majority of the series. I say majority because Corran gets a lot of super impressive feats later in the timeline, whereas Cam doesn't really do much from Vong War onward. While I do think Cam Solusar could maybe be ranked higher if we were solely evaluating martial skill, we have to keep in mind consistency, and there is simply much more going for the council members in the tiers above him when attributes like feats, power, and tactical viability are added to the mix. In C tier, we start to get to some real heavy hitters such as Kenth Hamner, Corran Horn, and Mara Jade Skywalker. All three of these masters have feats attesting to or statements of being amongst the strongest Jedi in the entire history of the NJO. This would scale them well above the council members featured in the previous tiers, as none, except maybe Silgal and Cam, possess supreme grade lore. Kenth Hamner served as a colonel in the New Republic Defense Force before becoming a Jedi, which granted him an extremely robust understanding of negotiation and battle tactics. Han Solo considered Kenth to be the most military-minded of all the Jedi alongside Kian Farlander and Kyle Katarn, with Luke also holding the Corellians' level-headedness and strategic insight in high regard. Though occasionally prone to frustration, Hamner's unique insight into both the physical and spiritual sides of warfare aided in many key alliance victories in the Yuuzhan Vong War, making him arguably the most battle-intelligent Jedi on this list, at least in terms of large-scale military efforts. That said, his talents for grand strategy did not inhibit the development of his personal power. Not only could he shred metal railings and staircases like they were nothing, but he has even conjured blasts powerful enough to stagger the likes of Saba Sabatine and Kip Duron. Granted, there's some context there, such as Saba deliberately holding back and Kip being off-guarded, but they're still insane feats regardless. Especially since Saba and Kip have some of the most impressive showings in the franchise, which we'll get to later. I know I keep saying that, but we will. Kenth Hamner is also a master of Force Lightning, having mastered a variant of the technique known as the Force Shock, which he used on multiple Jedi Knights in order to prevent them from waking up in a timely manner after he defeated them. Given that the Sith variant is noted to be a technique even the most powerful Jedi Masters struggle to deal with, Kenth's ability to use it in any capacity really goes a long way towards buffing his combative viability, since even low-level applications have been known to grant serious benefits. After being ousted from his position as the temporary Grand Master, Kenth Hamner would battle fellow council member Saba Sabatine within the hangar bay of the Jedi Temple, ultimately losing the fight and his life in a misguided attempt to keep the Order from defying the edicts of Dala. Both fought hard. However, the novel makes it clear that while Kenth was going at full tilt, Saba was not. This was, of course, due to her not wanting to kill her friend, whom it is stated she had sparred many times in the past and was not the fighter she was. That said, Saba still refers to Hamner as a master sword fighter, which confirms that she took his strength seriously, and further solidifies his place as one of the NJO's greatest. Corran Horn is next on this tier due to performing much better against Saba than Kenth, in addition to having higher ethereal feats and combat showings to his name. Corran has many accolades of being one of the strongest and most respected masters in the history of the NJO, with Luke stating that his skills in dueling were comparable to the battle master Cam Solasar even before he reached his peak. Like all Force users descended from the venerated Halcyon line, Horn's aptitude with telekinesis was virtually non-existent, only really being able to jostle small rocks or manipulate the roll of dice, and even those were on a good day. However, what he lacked in TK, he very much made up for with his skills in mind alteration and energy manipulation, fields in which Halcyons famously excelled. In addition to conjuring illusions of various shapes and scale, Corran Horn could influence the psyches of other Jedi en masse, having unintentionally mind-tricked his entire class, including Luke Skywalker, albeit briefly, at the beginning of his apprenticeship. For reference, a trained Force user successfully influencing the mind of another is consistently portrayed as an extremely high-tier feat, since they are all born with a degree of passive telepathic resistance. And again, this was quite literally his test run. Flipping to the other side of the Halcyon coin, Master Horn's capabilities with Tuta Minis were easily top 5 in the franchise. He is stated to be one of the few Jedi to have fully mastered the technique, having absorbed the energies of heat, electricity, blaster bolts, lightsaber blades, and even raw force blasts. Corran could then channel the power he soaked up with Tuta Minis into his own use of the Force, such as high-caliber TK or projective telepathy, meaning that Kenth's Force Shock would be the opposite of effective. Moving into feats, Corran Horn would battle Cam Solasar in a high-intensity sparring match years before the Vong War, and, in my view, performed better despite losing the match when Cam utilized his telekinesis. Jumping to the Second Galactic Civil War, Horn would spar Saba Sabatine on the forest moon of Endor. Although little of this bout was shown, neither Jedi appeared to hold a noticeable advantage, which is more than you could say for Kenth's fight. Corran Horn's most impressive combat feats are his multiple duels with Mara Jade Skywalker. Longtime friends, Corran and Mara have trained against each other for years in their efforts to improve. While Corran professed inferiority to Mara in their academy days, the two have been consistently portrayed as relative to each other in martial skill as Jedi Masters. This is made clear by their spar on Coruscant, where neither counselor is stated or shown to be superior. Luke himself marvels at the flow of their duel and notes how neither was at full HP due to injuries, further highlighting their relativity. This segues nicely into Mara Jade Skywalker herself, who, while relative to Corran Horn as a sword fighter, has a lot more going for her as an all-around combatant, hence why she's ranked at the top of this tier. In terms of accolades, Mara is stated by her fact file to have been one of the most powerful adepts to have served Palpatine during her tenure as the Emperor's Hand. Although her exact standing in the Empire is a bit unclear, issue 63 of the official Starships and Vehicles collection allegedly refers to her as a powerful Sith adept in the same vein as Asajj Ventress. I say allegedly because I can't find reliable scans, meaning that Emperor's Hand Mara was already as strong as the upper tier characters of the prequel era, which makes sense given the fact file statement. Her power would take a massive nosedive in the wake of Sidious's first death, as the two had been linked through the dark side on a near symbiotic level. This loss worked out for the best, though, as it opened the door for Luke to bring Mara back to the light side, with the two eventually falling in love and marrying. Taking up training as a Jedi, Mara Skywalker quickly established herself as a powerhouse, with numerous sources confirming that she became far more powerful than she had ever been as the Emperor's Hand. She is stated to be one of the strongest members of the NJO by the time of the Yuuzhan Vong War, as well as the most powerful supporter and ally of Luke's faction during his and Kip's infamous schism. A faction I would just like to point out included Corran Horn. Mara, like the rest of the new Jedi, would grow stronger during the years leading into the Second Galactic Civil War, with Jacen Solo, who is stated to have surpassed every member of the Council save Luke and was growing closer to Luke's level every day, still referring to her as a superb assassin even if her Force skills were crude compared to his own. Speaking of Force skills, young Mara Jade is stated by the Mysteries of the Sith Guide to possess supreme grade potential, which she clearly achieved, mastering a myriad of potent techniques. Such techniques include Force Stun, as well as the aforementioned Force Concealment, Force Lightning, and Tuta Minis. Mara's signature power was Danger Sense, having honed her threat detection abilities to where she outstripped even her husband despite her lower power level. Moving into feats, Mara should scale roughly evenly with Corran Horn in lightsaber skill, however her overall fighting abilities are more well-rounded, and she has fewer limitations as a Force user. Over the course of Legacy of the Force Sacrifice, Mara Skywalker would battle Lumaya and Jacen Solo, and although the former battle was inconclusive with the latter resulting in her death, they were anything but one-sided. Tracking her prey to the moon of Hesperidum, Mara engaged Lumaya in a brutal duel, outstripping Lobi's performance by going blow for blow with the Dark Lady, and actually coming close to defeating her before she was ambushed by the Sith Meditation Sphere ship, which gave Lumaya an opening to make her escape. Even if these variables make the fight inconclusive, this is still an incredible showing for Mara, given what I said earlier about Lumaya being strong enough to clash with Grandmaster Luke. Finally, we have Mara's brawl with Jacen Solo on Kavan, one of my favorite fights in the entire Star Wars EU. Mara Skywalker was killed in this engagement, but not before giving Jacen one of the most intense battles of his entire life. Despite her opponent's superior strength, Mara's utilization of the environment, coupled with her multitude of weapons and sheer tenacity, left both combatants near the brink of oblivion, with Kaitis seizing victory by conjuring an illusion of her son Ben, which caused her to hesitate just long enough for him to shove a poison dart into her leg. As incredible of a showing for Mara as this is, I won't deny the fact that the reason she did so well against Jacen was due to her preemptively analyzing the layout of their battlefield, with the confining nature of said battlefield nerfing his martial and force capabilities. This is supported by the aforementioned material confirming Jacen to have been stronger than Mara, as well as the Insider magazine stating that she already knew Jacen would triumph in a duel, hence her decision to move the fight to an area where a lightsaber would be ineffective in close quarters. All that being said, Mara Skywalker's ability to contend with Jacen Solo in the way that she did is still a feat very few characters in the franchise could even attempt, with their brawl standing as a testament to how she can punch way above her weight class by using what's around her in tactically advantageous ways. Before we move on, this is the tier where I personally think it would make the most sense to rank Legacy era Trasa and Kukruk, if for no other reason than they would have naturally grown stronger in the 149 years between Order 66 and the beginning of the comic, along with the statements of NJO Jedi being stronger than Old Order Jedi. In B tier, we have the Jedi Grandmaster Cole Skywalker, descendant of Luke Skywalker and father of Legacy Comics protagonist Cade Skywalker. I have a How Powerful Was video that breaks down Cole's combative abilities in much greater detail, which I highly recommend you check out, but I will be reiterating the broad points. Despite only appearing in the flesh in 9 out of the 56-issue series, Cole has some of the most impressive accolades and feats of any Skywalker. He is stated to have been the leader of his council and the NJO's greatest warrior at the time of his death, which automatically scales him above Trasa and Kukruk. This is backed up by Nat Skywalker, who notes that his brother understood the Force in ways he never could. His use of never could is important here since it confirms that Cole was stronger than Nat even when he was in his prime, with post-prime Nat still being strong enough to defeat multiple Sith troopers, a class of fighter consistently portrayed as master level. Even Darth Krayt seemed to hold a measure of respect for Cole Skywalker's strength, referring to the Grand Master as an esteemed foe in the Claws of the Dragon arc. Krayt at this point may have been weaker than he was during Fate of the Jedi, where he is confirmed to rival Prime Luke. However, he was still confirmed as one of the most powerful Dark Lords in all of history, standing far above every member of his one Sith Order. So, yeah, pretty significant praise. Cole's Force mastery is difficult to gauge due to his lack of exposure, however, he is confirmed to possess considerable power and has displayed skills in most of the Jedi standards, along with being one of the few members of his clan to become a Force Ghost, which speaks to his spiritual attunement. There is also some implications that he either has Shatterpoint or possesses insight into its core principles, either of which would buff his combative viability significantly. Cole Skywalker's most notable feat was his famous last stand during the massacre at Ossus. Determined to ensure the safety of the evacuating Jedi, Cole held the line against torrents of Imperials and Sith. In the end, he stood atop a mountain of bodies estimated to consist of 12 stormtroopers and 13 Sith warriors before a surprise blast of lightning in the back from a critically injured Darth Nihil finally killed him. Speaking of Nihil, Cole blitzes him shortly after he had decimated his close friend Wolf Sazin. As noted by multiple sources, Darth Nihil was pretty much the third strongest Sith of the Legacy era. He is stated as the top enforcer of Krayt's will both within and outside the Order in Issue 0, and was able to give End of Volume 3 Cade Skywalker a bit of a fight before being defeated, unlike Darth Talon, who was one-shotted. These displays become even more insane when we consider that Cole Skywalker was likely fatigued at the start of his last stand due to the extensive fighting he had endured beforehand, meaning we've never actually seen the Jedi Grandmaster fight at the peak of his capabilities, yet he could still flatten one of the strongest Sith of his time inside one panel. Before we proceed, I do think Cole has certain lore elements that could place him higher, however, he needs more feats for it to really stick. That said, like his peers, I will go over where I think his ceiling caps out later. Next in A tier, we have the Jedi Masters Saba Sabatine, Kyle Katarn, and Kip Duran. These are the highest echelon masters of the NJO Council, whose only real shortcoming is that they aren't main characters. As I think I've made clear with all the inferences, Saba Sabatine is a beast, both figuratively and sometimes literally. During the Alliance's attempt to recapture Centerpoint Station, Darth Caedus stated that Saba was a greater threat to him than either Leia Solo or Ben Skywalker. He goes on to maintain that while he could still defeat her, it would not be without difficulty on his part. And if she were to double team him with Luke, it would be impossible odds. Although we never get to see this confrontation play out, this is still more significant praise than Jacen ever gave to Mara, especially since Caedus grows progressively stronger over the course of the Legacy of the Force book series. For those who might question the validity of Caedus' word, it has actually been stated by series co-author Karen Travis that Jacen's power viewpoints are not misplaced, and that, and I quote, "the man is good at his work." So, yeah, when it comes to strength assessments, Caedus' word is arguably the most accurate resource for the Council during the LOTF timeframe. Master Sabatine would later take up the mantle of temporary Grand Master in the wake of Kenneth Hamner's death during Fate of the Jedi, which, while not strictly a title based on strength, really says a lot about her standing in the NJO hierarchy. Her aura was sufficient to bond with the same number of Zonama Seacot seed partners as Kip Duron, which, while not a metric for power, does speak to them having comparable levels of spiritual stability. Her telekinetic abilities were also sufficient to manipulate a nerfed Abeloth avatar, and her prowess with life sensing was so advanced that even Luke has deferred to them. Saba also seems to possess this sort of Crucitorn/Ultra Ego-esque ability wherein the more enwrapped in the primal fires of battle she gets, the stronger she becomes, which, while vaguely defined, does give her the potential to shrink the gap between herself and a more powerful adversary. Her most notable attribute was her sheer durability. In my view, Saba's capacity to withstand and fight through physical injury is the highest out of the NJO Council, even beating out the interminable Kukruk. She has had her bones broken, an explosion hitting her at point-blank range, a lightsaber's blade ignited through her stomach, and she has continued fighting as though they were minor inconveniences. If that wasn't impressive enough, Saba, unlike Kukruk, has been shown to retain most of her strength in the face of these injuries, meaning she could literally swallow an electro staff and could still probably solo everyone in the prequel trilogy. Joking? Mostly. As I've already covered, Saba Sabatine has fought both Kenneth Hamner and Corran Horn on separate occasions, defeating the former while deliberately holding back, and more or less equaling out the latter in pure swordsmanship, though her overall combat feats do scale higher. During the Dark Nest crisis, Master Sabatine fought the powerful Dark Jedi Welk at the heart of the Gorog Nest along with 3 Killik assassins who assisted him towards the battle's climax. Despite Welk having the power, territorial, and eventual numerical advantages against Saba, the battle was ultimately inconclusive, both combatants taking considerable damage, with Welk retreating while Saba finished off his assassins. To say that this is an impressive display of Saba overcoming stacked odds is an understatement, especially since, in addition to the advantages already listed, Welk had also been drawing on the collective force potential of the entire Gorog Nest to massively amp his strength. For reference, this amped Welk was powerful enough to give Grandmaster Luke a hard time. Granted, Luke's scaling during the Dark Nest trilogy is a little wonky given all the mental trials he goes through in that story, but it's still an incredible showing regardless. Lastly, we have what is not only Saba Sabatine's most impressive combat feat, but also one of the most impressive Star Wars feats, period. During the climax of Fate of the Jedi Apocalypse, Saba confronted an avatar of Abeloth deep within the bowels of Coruscant. Though the Chaos Bringer had robbed the Jedi Master of her lightsaber, she soon learned that a bearable is never without a weapon, and Saba proceeded to literally rip and tear the Abeloth to pieces. Now, if this had been a full-power Abeloth avatar, this feat alone would have been enough to advance Saba to the top of A tier and possibly break into the S tier. However, it is crucial to stress that this avatar had been massively nerfed by the deaths of its peers, as well as the damage Abeloth Prime was currently taking in her battle with Luke Skywalker and Darth Krayt in the realm beyond shadows. That said, even if the Avatar only represented a small fraction of the Chaosbringer's full strength, this is still a god-tier feat for Saba Sabatine, given that peak Abeloth is stated to have 12 times the power of Grandmaster Luke, and was a rival to the ones of Mortis, who are confirmed to be the physical avatars of the various aspects of the Force, and the strongest of the Celestials. Kyle Katarn, famed protagonist of the Dark Forces games, is a character whose lore and feats speak for themselves. There are libraries worth of content that confirm Kyle as one of the strongest Jedi Masters in the history of the NJO, being referred to as the Academy's foremost battle master, which ranks him well above Cam Solusar, whose raw martial skill rivaled Corran Horns, and by proxy Mara Jade and Saba Sabatine. This scaling chain is supported and buffed by Darth Kaitis, who, upon being ambushed by the Battle Master and 3 Jedi Knights on Coruscant, was quick to assess the Knights as posing no danger to him, yet directly referred to Katarn as a threat. Again, this is higher praise from a stronger version of Kaitis than the one who killed Mara, and in my view also exceeds the praise he gave Saba later in the book. Granted, Kaitis was still weakened from his battle with Luke when he made this statement. However, even if that just makes Kyle's and Saba's accolades equal out, Kyle at least has actual feats to draw on, whereas she has none. And again, we have to remember consistency of portrayal. Jumping to Fate of the Jedi, Luke states during his battle with Vian Gallion that, unlike Silgal, Kyle Katarn or Kip Duron might have been a good match for the Sith Lord, and even cites physical and mental strength as components for the comparison, meaning the two masters should be relative in those faculties, which is beyond impressive given Kip's standing compared to Luke, which we'll get more into shortly. Regarding Force combat, Katarn, despite his preference for sword fighting, was well known for being one of the relatively few characters in the series to have mastered both light and dark side abilities in equal measure. Such abilities include Force Protection, Force Absorption, Sever Force, Force Destruction, Force Lightning, and the Dark Shear, all of which being potent techniques with devastating effects. Moving into feats, Kyle Katarn would defeat Inquisitor Jarek at the climax of Dark Forces 2 by using Sever Force to nerf his baseline strength, as well as cut him off from the energies of the Valley of the Jedi. An amazing accomplishment given that base Jarek is confirmed to rival Darth Vader in power. After some time spent cut off from the Force due to a brush with darkness that Mara saved him from, Kyle would immerse himself in the valley to rekindle his connection to the universe and take up the Jedi path once again. Not only did this make him much stronger than he had been previously, but his raw Force potential also increased as a result, which he would of course build upon in the preceding years. During the events of the game Jedi Outcast, Kyle Katarn would confront the powerful Dark Jedi Desan at the heart of the Great Temple on Yavin 4 and defeat him after an intense battle. Although there are some ambiguities surrounding the canon rendition of this confrontation, we do see Desan absorbing the power of the temple's Force Nexus beforehand, with the Wizards of the Coast website referring to it as a furious lightsaber duel, signifying that it had not been an easy victory for Kyle. This makes sense considering that pre-Yavin Amp Desan was strong enough to clash with Luke Skywalker and even successfully hit him with a Force Blast. This may not have been Prime Luke, and it is in character for him to hold back against his former students. However, Outcast co-director Kevin Schilder has allegedly stated that Desan can pose a legitimate threat to Luke even on neutral ground. Again, I say allegedly because I can't find the original version of this post, with the game itself confirming that the Dark Jedi did successfully get the drop on the Jedi Master. To say that this is fucking impressive is an understatement, given that this was a weaker Desan than the one Kyle killed, with Luke around this time being stated to be stronger than ever, which would include the version of himself that beat Sidious. Lastly, we come to Master Katarn's battle with Darth Caedus outside the Senate Rotunda. As mentioned previously, Kyle entered the duel with the aid of 3 Jedi Knights, with Caedus still being a bit weakened from his bout with Luke in the previous book. Although the two sides were initially pretty even, Katarn was ultimately defeated when Caedus faked him out with what he thought was a force push, only for the Dark Lord to send a nearby speeder crashing into his back, which pushed him onto his foe's green blade, leaving him near death. Despite the rather gruesome loss, Kyle's battle with Darth Caedus actually speaks well of his power overall. The book states that the Jedi were able to stalemate Darth Caedus when they were fighting in sync, and since we know Katarn's teammates were no threat to Caedus on their own or collectively, it follows that Katarn was doing most of the heavy lifting, with his teammates mainly serving to shrink the gap between the Battle Master and the Sith Lord. To put it more plainly, Kyle Katarn only needed the aid of 3 young Jedi to match a slightly nerfed version of a Sith on par with Luke Skywalker. Makes sense now why this guy has prophecies reaching as far back as Bane's time. Kip Duron is at the top of this tier, matching Kyle Katarn in martial, physical, and mental strength, while also exceeding the Battle Master in both power accolades and force feats. Like many of his peers, Master Duron has enough lore detailing his strength to fill a Jedi archive. His raw potential was so great that Luke Skywalker compared Kip's power to Yoda and Ben Kenobi upon first sensing it. This is the same Ben Kenobi confirmed to have been far stronger than his prequel-era self, and was at least relative to A New Hope Darth Vader, who likewise was leagues above himself from Revenge of the Sith. It didn't take long for this insane potential to attract the attention of the spirit of Exar Kun, who, upon merging with Kip and feeding off the powers of all the other Academy students, evolved into an entity implied to rival Dark Empire Sidious. During the early Vong War, Kip, now a full Jedi Master, stated that he was more powerful than Luke Skywalker. However, not only does this contradict the multitude of sources referring to Luke as the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy during that time frame, but Duron would even contradict himself later in the series when he stated that Leia was as strong in the Force as he was, Leia having the same level of Force connection as her brother. Add on the story context of Vong War Luke being a suppressed fighter, along with Kip's arc of overcoming his animosity towards the Jedi Master, which he did, and I think we can safely dismiss this statement as self-aggrandizement rather than fact. All that being said, Duron was still perceived by Jedi such as Worth Skidder to be on a comparable tier to Luke, so it's not like the comparison is utterly baseless. This is supported by the fact that Kip was the only non-Skywalker Lady Lumaya considered as a candidate to become the next Dark Lord of the Sith, yet was passed over simply because she thought he was too stubborn and unpredictable, which, if anything, is an admittance that she wasn't confident she could control him. Makes sense given his history. By the time of Fate of the Jedi, Master Duron was well established in his role as a leading member of the Jedi Council, with the Dramateus Personae reference book stating that he was still one of the most powerful of the NJO. An impressive accolade considering how many Supreme-grade Jedi populate that book series. Moving into his abilities, Kip Duron, again like Kyle Katarn, could utilize a wide array of advanced powers from both the light and dark sides. He could subtly erase minds with memory rub as easily as he could break them with drain knowledge. He could bolster combat spirit with his battle mind as easily as he could crush it with his aura of uneasiness, and he could summon force lightning as easily as he could dispel it with his Tuta Minis. Fun fact, Kip is one of the few characters in the series shown dispelling force lightning without needing to draw it in first, or expressly using a hand gesture, a feat that shocked Jaina Solo, who had been the one attacking him. His most famous Force feat was when he used his TK power to move an artificial black hole generated by a Yuuzhan Vong Dovin basal. Although the singularity's exact size is unknown, they did have to be big enough to defend warships from starfighters, and since a black hole the size of a coin has more mass than the Earth, this is still one of the most impressive feats in all of Star Wars. Plus, this was pre-Prime Kip. Yeah. Regarding combat showings, Duron has fewer feats to his name than Saba Sabatine or Kyle Katarn, but the ones he does have are just as impressive, if not more so. As I alluded to a minute ago, Kip would briefly clash with pre-Prime Jaina Solo halfway through the Vong War, during a period where she was drawing on the dark side. Despite this amp, Kip matched Jaina blow for blow, with the book making it clear that he was holding back to help her vent her anger. This is supported by Jacen Solo, later admitting that Kip was far more skilled in saber combat than he was, with Vong War Jacen being confirmed to be stronger than Vong War Jaina. That said, Jaina was still noted as one of the best fighters of her generation at the time, which combined with her darkside amp makes Duron's ability to match her without even going all out nothing to overlook. Jumping to Legacy of the Force, we have Kip Duron's high-intensity spar with Luke Skywalker, which started as a 2v1 with Silgal before Luke defeated her, leaving it between them. Despite his lower scaling and the ease with which the Grand Master had bested his partner, Duron held his own against Luke pretty well, at one point deflecting a series of dual blade attacks with, quote, equal speed and minimal movement, before eventually stopping. Not a deathmatch, but as I've said many times throughout this video, it was a spar stated to be horribly dangerous to anyone who is not a Council Master, which is by no means a casual designation. Given that Luke was not only stronger than himself from the Vong War, but had also defeated a stronger version of Darth Caedus than the one who bested Mara and Kyle in the previous novel, Kip Duron's ability to clash with him in a meaningful way truly speaks to why he is considered one of the most legendary Jedi Masters in the entire franchise. In S tier, we have the Jedi Master Jaina Solo Fell and the Jedi Grand Master Luke Skywalker. These two share numerous accolades of being the apex members of not only the new Jedi Order Council, but also apex Jedi of the franchise. They are unequivocally two of the strongest beings in all of Star Wars, being able to give demigods a run for their money and even having the potential to surpass them. Jaina Solo Fell was the Sword of the Jedi, a title bestowed upon her by Luke during her knighting ceremony when the Force spoke directly through him. Though the meaning behind this title was initially a mystery, it was later revealed that being the Sword of the Jedi was essentially the new Jedi Order's equivalent of the Chosen One, meaning that Jaina occupied a similar place in destiny to her grandfather Anakin Skywalker, though she far surpassed him in developed power. Jaina Solo was noted to have attained Council-level strength as far back as Legacy of the Force Fury, with Luke later stating that she had proven herself to be the combat equal of anyone in the Order by the time of Fate of the Jedi Apocalypse. Not only does this accolade confirm that Jaina was capable of matching the prowess of any master featured in the previous tiers, it also confirms that she surpassed them, since Luke's phrasing of anyone in the Order would logically include himself, hence why they're ranked on the same tier. Despite her preference for physical combat, Jaina Solo Fell's Force abilities were phenomenal, her displays of power and skill standing out even amongst her kin. Speaking of her kin, Jaina and her brother Jacen are stated by the fact file to be, quote, inheritors of Skywalker Force powers. Whether or not this meant that they had equal potential to their mother and uncle is unclear. However, given how close Caedus ended up being to Luke, with Jaina being noted to have it in her to match his power level, the gap in their aptitudes was clearly minimal, at least on a cosmic scale. In terms of her ethereal moveset, Jaina's telekinesis could shatter a force choke conjured by Darth Caedus, and she has utilized advanced techniques such as memory rub, force stun, and force lightning. Though it is debatable whether or not she could utilize the latter without being in the dark side mental state she went through during the Yuuzhan Vong War. Solo's most notable esoteric power was Shatterpoint, which enabled her to destroy a disc of raw Beskar with a single tap. An impressive feat given Beskar's saber-resistant durability. Moving into feats, Jaina Solo, as mentioned, would clash with Kip Duron during the Vong War, which, while a better reflection on him at the time, still says a lot about her potential as a fighter. Her most famous combat displays were her duels with Darth Caedus in Legacy of the Force Invincible. Jaina fought her brother twice, and in both cases defeated him with extreme difficulty, the second bout finally resulting in the Sith's death. In case you need a reminder, Caedus killed Mara Jade, nearly killed Kyle Katarn, stood toe-to-toe with Luke Skywalker, and is directly confirmed to be more powerful than Darth Vader and Darth Sidious. Yeah. All that being said, it should be stressed that Jaina was amped by her uncle's battle meditation in the first fight, with Caedus being heavily nerfed in their second due to the loss of his left arm, as well as his obvious mental instability over the potential deaths of Tenel Ka and Alana. It is also stated in the Dramateus Persona that a good portion of Jaina's victory had been owed to her use of unorthodox Mandalorian-style combat techniques and her natural attunement to her brother. So, in essence, Solo never defeated peak Darth Caedus, and was only able to edge out a victory against a nerfed version due in no small measure to her use of tactics he was unaccustomed to dealing with. However, despite all of these variables, I still view these feats as solid evidence for Jaina Solo Fell's place on this tier. Even if we assume that one-armed Caedus was weaker than the version of him that beat Kyle Katarn, which is debatable, he was clearly still comparable to the upper echelon of the Jedi Council, since Jaina was stated to be council level even before her Mando and Shatterpoint training. Add on 4 more years of growth to the point where Solo could at least combat Luke Skywalker, whom Prime Darth Caedus could not beat, and I think it goes without saying that the Sword of the Jedi was worthy of her title. Grandmaster Luke Skywalker is at the top of this tier, which I doubt surprises anyone. As the titular protagonist of Star Wars, he has had decades to demonstrate his strength and has not disappointed. He is confirmed at numerous points in the new Jedi Order timeline to be the strongest member of the Jedi Council, the most skilled in saber combat, and one of the most powerful beings in the entire franchise. In terms of Force connection, Luke is stated to have either equal or greater potential than his father, Anakin Skywalker, who, in addition to being his era's chosen one, possessed greater power aptitude than any Jedi who had lived before him in the Old Order's 25,000-year history. I'll get more into the logistics of this in a bit, but suffice it to say, it's not a bad position to start. In terms of more direct scaling, Darth Vader considered Luke Skywalker to have been stronger than any Jedi in history as of Empire Strikes Back, even referencing Ben Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker in the comparison. 2 Jedi he would obviously have a decent gauge on. Luke is later stated to have been stronger than ever just 1 year after the events of Dark Empire, confirming that he had surpassed the Leia-amped version of himself that defeated the strongest incarnation of Darth Sidious. Moving into the Yuuzhan Vong War, Legacy of the Force, and Fate of the Jedi eras, Grandmaster Luke is consistently cited as the strongest Jedi in the NJO, which would include almost every master featured on this list at various points in their development, with Jaina Solo herself referring to her uncle as the most powerful Jedi in the galaxy in FOTJ Vortex. Pretty straightforward. As one might expect from someone of such immense power, Luke Skywalker's Force capabilities were about as well developed as possible. He has the largest scale feats of telekinesis of the entire Council, having replicated Kip's black hole feat when he was suppressed, as well as buckling Abeloth Prime. Luke also shared Corran, Kip, and Jaina's respective mastery of the illusion, lightning, and shatterpoint abilities, and is the only counselor of his time to learn Ang-Ti-derived techniques such as fold space and mind-walking. At the climax of the Yuuzhan Vong War, Luke Skywalker would defeat Supreme Overlord Shimra after a hard-fought battle in his throne room. In addition to his biotech enhancements, Shimra is noted to have possessed the concentrated combined strength of the entire Vong species, with Luke comparing the Overlord directly to Darth Sidious, further highlighting how the Jedi Master had surpassed his Dark Empire incarnation. Jumping to Legacy of the Force, Skywalker killed Lumaya after a pitched battle on Teferon, and later defeated Darth Kaitis in an absolutely savage duel aboard the Anakin Solo. Although this was not quite Prime Kaitis, he was stronger than the version of himself that defeated Kyle Katarn, with both the Invincible novel and the original databank confirming that Luke could have defeated Prime Darth Kaitis if he had to, with his refusal to fight him again stemming from his fear that he would kill his nephew and leave himself susceptible to his anger. Finally, the Grand Master would battle Abeloth alongside Darth Krayt within the Realm Beyond Shadows during the final act of FOTJ Apocalypse, with the pair ultimately emerging victorious. Although Abeloth had not been at full strength, this is still, by far, one of the most insane combat feats in the series, given what I said earlier about peak Abeloth being a dozen times more powerful than Luke, and a rival to the ones of Mortis. Before we move into the final section of this video, this is where I think you could rank Cole Skywalker depending on how you interpret certain aspects of his lore. As mentioned previously, Cole is stated by Nat to have been stronger than him even when he was in his prime, with Nat also noting that his brother had been a natural leader and, quote, what folks looked for in a Skywalker. Since leadership can have both mental and physical components, you could potentially take this statement to mean that Cole Skywalker had a similar reputation to what Luke and Jada had in their day, which would require at least semi-comparable feats. Similar inferences can be made with Krayt's praise of Cole as an esteemed foe, given that Krayt was a close rival to Luke in Fate of the Jedi. Even when factoring in Krayt's illness, from an in-universe perspective, it's unlikely that Cole would elicit such praise from the Emperor if he didn't at least somewhat echo what Krayt had witnessed from Luke firsthand. This is quite a bit of twisting and turning to be sure, and I won't blame anyone who thinks I'm stretching Cole Skywalker further than he was ever intended to go. He does not have enough feats to place him in S tier reliably, but I do think the implications of his lore at least put it up for discussion. Last but certainly not least, we have the hypothetical S-tier plus. In this category, we have a hypothetical full potential Jaina Solo Fell, and a hypothetical full potential Luke Skywalker. Given that I've already covered many aspects of the Skywalker clan's potential pool in both this and past videos, I'll keep things as concise as possible. While Jaina Solo and Luke Skywalker are the strongest members of the new Jedi Order Council, neither character has ever been shown at their absolute peaks, mainly due to the EU's cancellation. That being said, there is enough information available for us to scale them appropriately. As I mentioned in her original breakdown, Jaina Solo is implied by multiple sources to at least possess a comparable level of raw force connection to that of her uncle, even if her developed powers were well below his. This is supported by her brother Darth Kaitis being strong enough to give Luke a high diff fight, as well as her standing as the next generation's chosen one, which, depending on how meta you want to get with that, could be taken as her possessing equal force potential to her grandfather Anakin Skywalker. Which I'm not against believing, though it does bring up a few questions regarding her younger brother Anakin Solo, given that he was noted to have had more natural power than either of his siblings. Full potential Luke scaling is much more straightforward. Again, as I said in his previous breakdown, Luke Skywalker is noted time and time again to have either equal or greater Force potential than his father, with Darth Vader stating point blank that the Force was stronger in his son than it had been in Anakin. As to where Anakin's full potential capped out, we see him unlock his full power when he merged his spirit with the Force-dimensional plane of Mortis during the Clone Wars. In this new state of being, the first chosen one simultaneously dominated the son and the daughter in their bestial states. This feat is more impressive than anything pre-Prime Jaina or Luke have done, since all of the ones were stated to be more powerful than Abeloth, whose strength exceeded FOTJ Luke's a dozenfold. Using that feat as a base, I think it's reasonable to conclude that a hypothetical full potential Mortis-amped Jaina and Luke would, at the bare minimum, be able to do the same, with a Mortis Luke being even more powerful than Mortis Anakin given the material citing his higher potential. I'd even go out on a limb and say that an absolute peak of power Luke Skywalker would rival the father of Mortis, since he was stronger than both his children and Abeloth in his prime. It's discussions like this that make you forget that this all started with a boy and his uncle buying 2 droids from some Jawas, doesn't it? Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this breakdown and ranking of the new Jedi Order era Jedi Council. I imagine this video will incur a lot of discussion, and I'm very excited to hear what you all have to say. As always, leave any thoughts or questions in the comment section below. May the Force be with you, stay safe, and I'll see you guys later.